May need to give Paula a standing ovation.
Yeah.
Well, gee, that's embarrassing. I thought I was muted there for that last little turmoil. In just a minute, I think we're good to go.
I would have warned you if you said anything bad. Don't worry.
Paula would rather have a beverage. Just saying.
Oh,
In just a minute, I think we're good to go.
I would have warned you if you said anything bad. Don't worry.
Paula would rather have a beverage.
oh.
I'm just going to take a chance and say, let's proceed.
Okay. And I mean, we're recording it, so that should theoretically cover us, right?
Oh, yes, hopefully.
Okay. Okay. Well, we have a quorum, so Alice, do you feel comfortable calling it to order? Okay. Okay, we'll call a meeting to order. We'll start with roll call.
Oh, apologies. Carly Aparicio? I see, you're muted, Carly.
She said present.
Thank you. Brent Bybee?
Present.
Cody Cornett is absent. He said he would try to join us.
Yep.
Alan Eastling? I think Alan's joining now. There he is. Philip Mosher?
Perfect timing.
Linda Miller?
Here.
And Mark Popoff.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. So up next, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. We got the flag up there if you want to pin that photo or however folks want to do it. Okay. So I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I just joined. I'm sorry I'm late here.
That's okay. We got you on the roll call. You hopped in right when we called your name, so it was perfect timing. Okay, so next up is approval of the agenda. Did anyone see any edits that needed to be made? Did staff have any edits? Or are there any motions on the floor? Crickets? Nothing?
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented.
Your first motion, Linda. Thank you. I will second that motion. All those in favor, raise your right hand or say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And all those opposed? Okay.
Excuse me,
Unanimous.
Brent.
Yep.
I didn't hear Philip Mosher. Did he approve?
Yes, he did.
Thank you.
Okay. And so next we'll go into approval of the minutes from the February 18th, 2021 meeting. Are there any edits from any of the commissioners or any motions to approve that agenda? Or sorry, approve those minutes?
I'll motion to approve the minutes from February 18th, 2021.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, so it was moved by Alan, seconded by Carly. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed? All right. Is that good, Paula?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so now we'll open it up for public comment. If there's any members of the public, it looks like we have possibly two. If you have anything you'd like to comment on, that's not related to the agenda items tonight, feel free to identify yourself, state your name and address for the record, and then you may state that or make a statement towards the commission. Going once.
Sorry, I'm Danielle Minton with MKM Hotels. We own the Shiloh Inn and the Dalles. I'm just here to listen in about the sign that's going to be put in at the Chevron
Wait.
station.
Excuse me, Chair Bybee. I need
Yep.
her full name and her address, please.
Okay.
Danielle Minton, MINTON,
And your address?
2975 Southwest Lars Terrace. And that's in Beaverton, 97003.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Danielle. Okay, and so you're here just for the agenda item?
Yes, for the sign for the Chevron.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, what we will do is we're going to get to that portion of the hearing. There will be an opportunity for public comment during that portion of the hearing. So you will have an ability to provide comment there.
Thank you.
All right. Was there any other public input? I see we have Nate Stice down there. Guessing you're here for some of the later agenda items. And I will take that as a yes. So we will move on. Okay, so let's go into staff comments and project updates. It's a change of pace. Usually we do it at the end. So.
Yeah, I'm a little bit unprepared. So Chair, thank you. I did have a chance to talk to Chair Bybee today, and one of the questions that he raised and I thought I should hit on today is a little bit about the Legacy project. As you may have heard, the Legacy subdivision appeal that went to the Land Use Board of Appeals that decision has been reversed by the Land Use Board of Appeals. That decision was out, oh gosh, it must have been about 3 weeks ago, and it's just completed its appeal period through there was an option to have the decision appealed to the State Court of Appeals. No one exercised that right, so the decision has been issued and it's final. It was approved with the conditions of approval that you recommended to the City Council in the summertime. I guess that would have been in July or August of 2020. And City Council took action in September of 2020. So so here we are. We've had a couple of articles come out in media about this, and what we have done, the applicant has requested a fence permit to put a fencing around the site, and they've moved around a little bit of dirt, not enough to warrant a permit yet. And then I understand we're going to work with them to get their engineering drawings and other plans in. So we expect that development will come forward for development through the normal process in the coming weeks. And so we'll keep, I know there's a lot of interest in the community. We'll keep you posted. Feel free to raise questions if you have them, or direct folks that have questions in the community our way. And Josh or Dawn or I can answer those questions for you. As far as other projects, we are at the direction of City Council. We are going to be bringing forward a transitional housing code. We do not have an allowance right now of any kind to to address or even to allow anywhere in the city any transitional housing of any kind for shelter housing or anything like that. And so our city council has asked us to look at our land use code. So in the coming months, we'll be bringing forward some options, some code amendment options for your consideration. I do know that the state legislature is looking at some legislation that would, I think it's going to require cities to make land available for this type of, but in the meantime, it's a priority of our council to get our code lined up and in order to handle this type of use. So with that, I think that's all I have. Do we have any other updates, Don or Josh, that I should be providing? Thank you.
Hey, Mark, we're getting a little bit of feedback from your phone. If you could just hold your microphone away from your mouth a little bit until you're ready to speak. Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, that most of you definitely weren't around when we reviewed the legacy development. We've had a little bit of turnover since then. I believe Mark and Philip were there, and then Alan, I believe you came on at the very end. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So yeah, there's been a little bit of turnover since then, but yeah, that was a long review. Interesting path too. So it's interesting where it ended up, and we'll just plan for the future from here on out for hopefully identifying as what we can within those applications and sticking to facts as much as possible. Okay,
I guess I wanted to make one, this might be interesting to planner geeks like us. The Land Use Board of Appeals at the state level, I have never seen them reverse a decision like this. It's typically they'll remand it back to the city, whatever body made the final decision. So they will say for instance, in this case, the city council, you erred in this way, we direct it back to you for your final decision. In this case, they just reversed it. So it's new. Even our attorney that was representing us had no experience with that. So I think it's just something interesting. I don't know what it means necessarily. I do know that, it's just like everything else, housing is a priority at the state level. So maybe there's some priority that those decisions be moved along a little quicker. Reversing it is for those decisions that are maybe a little more straightforward in application that can easily be reversed. Maybe it happens that way. I don't really know what any of this means, but I think it's interesting to watch. So keep an eye open for other LUBA decisions and see what you find out.
All right. Awesome. Dowell's making history. Always. Okay. If there's no other staff comments or project updates, we'll move into any commissioner comments or questions. Don't all jump up at once.
Oh, I have a question. This isn't really related to anything on the agenda, but does anybody know what the status is with the old recreation building? Supposedly they were going to restore part of it, but nothing's happened for about 2 years now.
Sure. Yes, we have an update. The applicant, the potential owner, the one who's negotiating to eventually own that property, is working on some plans and has been some of those plans or the details that have needed to get some engineering completed in order to have a building permit issued. That engineering is now finished. And so the revised plans are back in, and Dawn and I are looking at that, and we're corresponding a bit with Todd Carpenter, who is the potential developer of those properties. So yeah, that's the status at this point. I think you'd like to begin and move forward. I have not yet met Mr. Carpenter, so I want to have a chance to do that and to just get myself up to speed with the project, being fairly new in the city. And it's just interesting how COVID has kept us from meeting one another in person. I probably would have met him long before this. So that's the update. I'll keep you posted. Feel free to ask again.
And as long as we're talking about updates that are not on the agenda, is there an update on the Tony building?
Chair and Commissioner Mosher, that particular project is, we have at the staff level some work to do. So Urban Renewal Board, and I can't remember if I told you this at the last meeting or not. So you may already know this, but the Urban Renewal Board made public their wish to have staff prepare bid documents to have the building demolished and to make way for development ready, more of a shovel ready development site that could accommodate mixed use and potentially accommodate more housing in the downtown. So we have some more at the staff level, some more work to do to get some cost estimates before we can issue those bid documents, but that's the direction we were given. And so more to come on that, but that's the very latest update.
Thank you. And so the costs for that demolition would be carried by the city? Or?
At this point, that's the proposal, would be urban renewal funding. And the cost estimate, just because it's public, I can tell you this, that we've received so far is between $200,000 and $250,000 for the demo of the building. We still have some more research to do because there are some other factors that may cause that price to increase that we need to research a bit more.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other commissioner comments or questions? Well, if not, we're going to move into the quasi-judicial public hearing portion of this hearing. So for folks that haven't been part of a quasi-judicial hearing yet, it's a little bit different than the legislative stuff we've covered throughout the last couple meetings. So I'm going to go over some of the rules right now. So now is the time specified for the Planning Commission to conduct a public hearing. The purpose of this public hearing is to consider the following matter. Consideration of variance application number 129-21 to install an additional sign on an existing freestanding sign pole, resulting in a total sign area exceeding the maximum allowed size on the subject property. The substantive criteria upon which the Planning Commission will base its decision in this matter are found in the Dallas Municipal Code section 10.3.070.030. A public hearing is required by law and certain rules apply. First and foremost, you must be recognized by the chair in order to speak and present testimony. When recognized by the chair, please unmute your microphone and state your name and mailing address for the record. The hearing is required by law to be tape recorded. Generally, the public hearing procedure is as follows. Prior to the public hearing, a determination will be made of the qualifications of the commission members and allow for challenges from the audience. I will open the public hearing with a staff report. The purpose of the staff report at this point is to further identify the applicable criteria of the case being considered and to provide background information about the case. After the staff report, we will hear testimony from the proponents, those persons in favor of the application. Next, there will be testimony from the opponents, those not in favor of the application. Next, there will be testimony from anyone else who wishes to offer testimony or ask questions. Then, in honor of the right of rebuttal, we will again hear from the proponents. To expedite the hearing, the commission members may ask questions of any person as they testify. When this process has been concluded, we will close the public testimony portion of the hearing. During the hearing, some important standards apply. First of all, those who testify must hold their testimony to decision criteria. As in all land use hearings, there are complete set of rules, procedures, and criteria we must follow. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission members and the parties an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Third, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with details specific enough to allow the city to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in the circuit court. Fourth, prior to the conclusion of the public hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. If such a request is made, the law states that the commission must grant the request by either continuing the hearing to a time and date at least 7 days from the date of the initial hearing, or the record must be kept open for a period of at least 7 days. These are the rules. Are there any questions? I'm not hearing any. So at this time, I'll ask, have any members of the commission had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, or bias which would prevent you from rendering an impartial decision on this matter?
No.
Hearing no.
No.
Head shakes.
No.
I'm not hearing anyone speak up. Okay. Does anyone in the audience wish to challenge the qualifications of any members of the commission? And if you do, remember to unmute yourself. I believe we only have 2 other people, so it'd just be Danielle and Nate. And I'm not hearing them speak up. So, okay. The public hearing is now open. May we have the staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Bybee. Joshua Chandler, Community Development Department. I'm going to share my screen here for you. I put together a little PowerPoint so we can visualize what we're talking about here this evening. So can everybody see that just fine? Take that as a yes. As mentioned, the next item, or this item, variance application number 129-21. The applicant is the Myers Sign Company of Oregon. The address is 3213 Brett Clodfelter Way. The zoning district is general commercial. However, this evening we're more specifically looking at the highway district as it pertains to chapter 10.13 sign regulations. So as Chair Bybee mentioned, the proposal is consideration of a variance application to install an additional sign on an existing freestanding sign, which will result in a total sign area that exceeds the maximum allowed sign on this subject property. This is the subject property for you. This is the location of where the sign is. And this is the sign, the proposal that was provided to us. This top portion is what you see now. It's the existing sign. And this section on the bottom is what's being proposed. There's a breakdown for you here. Existing sign area is 145 square feet. The proposed sign area is 86 square feet, which will result in a proposed 231 square feet of sign area. As mentioned, this exceeds the maximum sign allowance, which is 160 square feet. The highway district criteria of the sign code is listed here. We're most specifically, we're looking at this right here, which is 1 square foot of sign area per linear foot of major street frontage. So as you can see from this, the site plan that was provided to us, the sign area 159, 3 7/8, we rounded it up to 160 for this staff report. So that is the maximum allowance for a freestanding sign for this subject property. This is Staff used GIS to put together to kind of show you what the highway district is. That's the area in pink outlined in red. So it's the location is listed in our code. So staff put together this shape file. The areas in orange essentially are every property that touches the highway district. So every property that would allow, that could go up to that 1 square foot per linear frontage. So now we're going to get into the review criteria for a variance. You don't have to focus too hard on this. We're going to go through every one. The first criteria, staff feels that the first criteria is met. A proposed variance will not be contrary to the purposes of this title. This title meaning the Dallas Municipal Code, policies of the comp plan, and any other applicable policies and standards adopted by the city. The intent of this sign is to increase the advertising for the lot. There's a new product being offered at this gas station, so they would like to use this signage to bring in interstate commerce off of I-84. Staff felt that this speaks directly to the purpose of the sign code, which is two of the purposes or the goals of the sign code: to improve the effectiveness of signs in identifying and advertising businesses, as well as providing for the reasonable, orderly, and effective display of outdoor advertising. Like I said, staff feels that this one, it's definitely what they're intending to do. Criteria is met. The next criterion, criterion B, exceptional, extraordinary circumstances that apply to this subject property, which do not apply generally to other property in the same zone or vicinity. Such circumstances are a result of lot size or shape, topography, circumstances over which the applicant has no control. So for this, when discussing the zone that we are looking at is specific to that highway district, as I mentioned. This criteria is not, staff did not feel is met. The applicant, stated that due to the odd shape of the property, as well as a perceived frontage on the property, would make you think that they have more frontage than they really do. This speaks to, there's a portion, if you're out there, there's a segment of land in front of the parcel that is actually just, it's an undeveloped lot. It's informally used for parking. You drive out there, you'll probably see a semi-tour truck parked there. They feel that this is actually what is perceived as the frontage. However, Chapter 10.3 does not permit sign allowances based on visual appearance or the perception of a property. It's rather the physical dimensions of that property. In using GIS, that map that I showed earlier, staff was able to compile, it's just about 200 properties are located within the highway district. Many of these properties are along West 2nd and 6th Streets. Quite a few out there, actually. And most of these properties, well, many of these street frontages are actually less than the 160 feet that the subject property has. So staff determined the subject property is not unique in size, specifically street frontage. It is actually quite consistent with other properties in the highway district. Now, moving on to the next criteria, the variance is necessary for the preservation of a property right of the applicant, which is substantially the same as owners of the other property in the same zone. This kind of touches on what we just talked about, in that this is not a unique property by any means compared to other properties in the highway district. Staff also added in that, actually, if you were to look at it, and if we were to grant this variance for all of the 200 properties within the highway district, we would actually be in contrary to the purpose of the sign regulations. Two areas in particular: improving the neat, clean, and orderly, attractive appearance of the city, meaning that if we allowed all 200 properties right along I-84 to exceed their maximum sign area, we would have far more signs than what we clearly have when you drive down I-84. So, staff determined that granting this variance is unnecessary for preserving the property rights of the subject property. The next criterion, the conditions or circumstances justifying the variance have been willfully or purposefully self-imposed and do not result from a violation of this title. This criterion is not met. This is for a new service. So this request is for additional signage. This is not a result of a violation of this title. However, this new signage is to promote a new service at an existing gas station. And staff would agree, businesses, the applicant claims that without this variance, their business revenue will be directly impacted. Staff would agree, a business's revenue stream may have factors out of their control. However, the addition of this business was willfully imposed on the subject property. Staff recommends that all proposed businesses or any changes in a business first reach out to the city to verify if that new business will be in compliance with the Dallas Municipal Code. In this case, reaching out to see if signage would work or not before entering into this. As mentioned, criterion is not met. The next criterion, the proposed variance will not substantially reduce the amount of privacy enjoyed by the users of neighboring land uses if the variance were not allowed. Staff believes that the criterion is met. Basically it's an addition to an existing sign that's there. Staff does not believe that this would impact privacy of neighboring lots. And then the final criterion, the proposed variance is the minimum variance, which would alleviate the difficulty. So the applicant stated that the size that they're proposing, it's a 6 foot tall sign that based on the Federal Highway Administration's Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Device Standards, mouthful there, this 6 foot tall sign would relate to a 600-foot viewing distance. Staff took that at 600 feet, created a buffer in GIS, and actually found that both Interstate 84 ramps right there, are actually further than 600 feet, which would then require a traveling motorist traveling at about 65, 70 miles an hour. They actually would not be within the 600-foot viewing distance until they had actually passed the exit. As I mentioned earlier, the criterion is not met, and staff determined that it would actually, to effectively promote interstate commerce, they would ultimately require an additional viewing distance, a larger sign ultimately. Commission alternatives for this evening. Staff's recommendation is denial of variance 129-21, excuse me. I skipped the last slide, but as you can see, 4 of the 6 criterion were not met. So this denial would be a request to install an additional sign on an existing freestanding sign, which would result in the total sign area exceeding the maximum allowed size of the subject property. The alternative to that would be approving this variance, which would be the same request. It would result in a total sign area of 231 square feet, where the maximum is 160 square feet. If this is the alternative that the commission that chooses to go with, they would direct staff to prepare a resolution of approval with findings that support this variance. And that's it for my presentation, and I am more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay. I think we're gonna hold off on questions until everyone's had a Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Chair, feel free to ask questions or whatever you need to do, but I did want to say I think we need to add something to the script that isn't in there today. And sorry about that. We need to allow the applicant to have an opportunity to present following the staff presentation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm more than happy to accommodate that. Okay. Yeah, let's do the commission members have any questions for staff from the staff report? I see Linda's hand up in the conference room.
Has Chevron made any comment about this since it's going to be on the same post as their sign?
So not directly, actually. No, this is an added product at the Chevron. So it'll actually be this crispy, crunchy chicken is going to be offered at the food mart that's there at the gas station. So the owner fully intended on adding this product, and they're being represented by the sign company, who I do not believe is in attendance this evening.
It'd be interesting to know, since it's on the same post as Chevron.
Right, it's the same. It's the same building. It's the same business. It's just like the gas station will still be there, but this will be a product that's within the gas station's main convenience store, if you will.
But Chevron is the major at that business.
Correct.
Commissioner Miller, it's like a product that's offered inside the mini mart of this.
I understand that.
Okay.
But their main income is from Chevron.
Yes, I do believe so.
Okay. Did you have any question? I mean, so you're trying to relay that it would be nice to have comment from Chevron,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Okay. And staff, are you saying that the person who submitted this application is a representative for Chevron, correct?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Property owners listed on the application, and then the applicant is technically the sign company. The owner went to the sign company to get this sign approved.
Okay.
Okay. Does that clear that up, Linda?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Were there any other commissioner comments or questions for staff?
I have a question. My concern about this would have more to do with engineering. Is that post going to be able to withstand the force of the additional sign when you have a strong wind blowing through there? I used to work at the Shiloh, and we've had winds so strong that's peeled vinyl siding off the building and took part of a roof off once.
To be honest, Counselor or Commissioner Popoff, that would be a question for building codes. We would not review that at this stage. If the variants were approved, it would go through a sign permit with us, but the actual structural makeup of that building and adding to it, that would be something covered by Wasco County building codes.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Were there any other questions for staff from the commissioners? I'm not hearing any. So we are going to move on. I would like to provide the applicant opportunity to provide testimony at this point. Is the applicant present?
I do not believe they are this evening.
Okay. Okay. Well, we wanted to provide that. Unfortunate they're not here, but that's okay. Okay. So we will move on to if there's anyone that wishes to testify in favor of the application. So if yes, please state your name and address for the record. and you may provide your testimony. And I'm not hearing anyone jump up. Going once, twice. Okay, so we'll move on to the next portion. Does anyone wish to testify in opposition to the application? If yes to that, state your name and address for the record, please. And be sure to unmute yourself if you haven't. Okay, going once, twice. Okay, does anyone wish to testify that is not in favor or opposition, or that would like to ask questions? If so, please state your name and address for the record. All right, once, twice. Okay, moving on. Okay, so do any of those in favor of the application? Okay, that's for rebuttal. We'll skip that since we had none in favor or opposition. Do commissioners feel that they have enough information to make a decision? And we'll go through one by one. I'll say yes, I have enough information. Philip?
Yes, I think it seems pretty clear.
Okay, and Carly?
Yes.
Okay, and Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, and Alan?
Yes.
I believe that's everyone we have. Okay, perfect. Okay.
Hold on just a minute.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry, Linda. I'm sorry about
Yeah,
that.
you're not gonna get away with that.
Do you have enough information?
I do.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so if you folks are ready, we'll move into deliberation. We'll close the public hearing. The public hearing is now closed. Feel free to deliberate, commissioners. Is there anyone that wishes to discuss the criteria? Is anyone, does anyone feel that the application does meet the criteria? What are your thoughts and opinions?
Well, to me, it seems pretty clear cut from Josh's presentation that it does not meet the criteria. And I can see that those rules make sense to avoid kind of a forest of signage along the freeway. So it seems actually pretty clear cut to me.
Okay. Linda, do you have any comments?
No, having traveled across this country numerous times, sometimes the signage keeps you awake, but too much, and I think in this area there would be too much.
Okay. Carly?
Just thanks to the staff for doing very thorough, detailed review. It really presented some really thoughtful information. And I think that from my perspective, it's a slippery slope conversation of if we're going to allow this variance, then we are going to be expecting a lot of additional requests. And if the clean and neat, I think is the direct word that Josh used as part of our code, that really is something that we need to keep in mind.
Perfect. Thank you. And Alan?
I don't have anything to add. Nice job, Josh.
Okay. It is, I mean, it is unfortunate to face a denial. I mean, it's never, you always would like a positive outcome for an application. And I believe the planning department's goal is always to hopefully lead folks down that route as much as possible. And if something just does not meet the criteria, factually, if it doesn't meet the criteria, it unfortunately can't be approved in this instance. So it doesn't sound like there was too much. It doesn't sound like the owners were too upset at the decision, and especially going into something like this where you're facing criteria where you're going to get denied. Sometimes folks end up just accepting that, which is understandable. So moving on, is the commission ready for a motion, or would anyone like to motion for decision from staff? We have a couple alternatives on the table. Either one for the staff recommendation, denial of variance 129-21, or we would approve the variance, but we would have to go and specifically state for all the criteria that were not met, how the request does meet those criteria. So are there any motions from the commission?
I'm okay to move to accept the staff recommendation and deny the application.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Do we need to specifically state that entire sentence for the recommendation? I see Jonathan shaking his head. Okay.
Yes,
do you have the? Sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
I said yes, please. If that's the commission's decision, please read it as it's presented from the staff in the agenda report.
Okay. So Philip, if you want to amend your motion, we had a motion and a second. We're gonna amend that though. If you could amend that, Philip, do you have the packet in front of you where you can read that language exactly?
What page is it? Yes, I do. What page is it?
Page 31 of 54.
I move to accept the staff recommendation to a denial of the variance 129-21, a request to install an additional sign on an existing freestanding sign resulting in the total sign area exceeding the maximum allowed size of the subject property.
Okay. It's been moved by Philip. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Alan seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. None there, so the vote is unanimous for staff recommendation. And the variance 129-21 is denied. Okay. So let's move on to the next portion of the hearing. Which is the legislative portion, which I believe Matt is here for, correct?
Yes.
All right, and Dawn, are you presenting for that?
Excuse
Well, I
me.
think Matt and I, oh, sorry.
Go
I'm
ahead, Paul.
sorry. Do we have to address the resolution?
Oh,
Yes, please.
yes, we do. Okay.
Thank you.
I'm so used to doing that at the next meeting for some reason. It's been a while. Okay. Okay, so we have resolution number PC 596-21. Let's go. And essentially, we just need a motion for staff's recommendation on this one, correct?
It would be a motion to approve the resolution.
Okay. So do I hear any motions for?
What was the resolution again? Oh, this for the sign?
Yes, yeah, this is for what we
Oh, okay.
just made.
Okay, yeah, I understand.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite following. How is it resolution different from the motion we just did?
So it's been a little while since we've had an actual quasi-judicial, so I understand the confusion, Philip. There's the actual hearing, which we make a decision on, and then there's a resolution that gets filed that follows that decision. And
Okay.
Alice, you can explain that probably a little bit better than I can.
My understanding is the resolution memorializes the decision, and so it's an official action that memorializes it and documents it. So we ask that you take action on it to be consistent with your previous motion on the variance application.
Okay.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, Jonathan, do you want me to recite anything from that resolution, or do we just simply need a motion on that?
It could be passed like a typical motion, which is what it is, by first and second of the commission. And so Alice hit the nail on the head in case there was any other confusion about specifically what it would be that you would be making a motion on. And these types of resolutions are sort of the second piece, as you explained, Brent, with quasi-judicial hearings, and it's sort of just making it official. That's the idea.
So Chair, if it would make it easier, I will read the resolution, the title at the very top, if it's okay. Resolution number PC 596-21, approval of variance application. No, it should be denial of variance application.
Yes.
So it sounds like we need an amendment to it.
Paula, do you have any comments on that one? Maybe
No
we can
comments
bring.
that wouldn't embarrass me.
Okay.
I inserted the incorrect resolution. My apologies.
Okay, Chair. What we're going to do is we'll bring it back next meeting. We'll bring back the correct resolution, but we do have your vote on the variance, so we'll bring that back for to be memorialized at the next meeting.
Okay, yeah, that's understandable. No worries, and don't worry, Paula.
And Chair, I want to make a comment that this is the first planning commission I've worked with in my career that has done resolutions, so I'm feeling a little clunky. But maybe I should get into a routine where when this comes up, I'll just read it and then you can decide, you can make a motion and vote on it.
Well, I'm so used to as well. Usually what we do is we'll do them at the next meeting. That's how it has kind of been, because sometimes there's edits or something to the staff report. So it more than happy to move it until next meeting. No worries. Okay, so let's move on. Let's move to the legislative portion of the hearing. And Dawn, are you going to be presenting for that, or is it going to be Matt?
So it's going to be pretty much Matt, but we'll be tag teaming throughout. Alice, Josh, Brandon, and I will probably all assist. But so I can go ahead and just start off saying you have the attached memo that's dated March 11th, which is what we consider our batch 3 for our housing code amendments. We're going to summarize the updated second batch, just kind of go over what we did at our last meeting so you guys can see some of the changes we made, as well as work on our third batch today, which consists pretty much of like identifying code amendment recommendations that assist us in providing additional housing options, reducing some barriers, as well as consider some less traditional type housing. We did receive a letter just before the meeting, and it looks like we do have Mr. Foote here. A lot of the comments in his letter, some do pertain to some of the topics we have tonight. And so what we'll do is we'll have Alice go ahead, not Alice, sorry. We'll have Paula go ahead and send that out to the commission so everybody's able to take a look at that. Matt and I will probably just go over a couple ideas and comments. but some of those are pertaining to more so development and system development charges, more of the development side versus that just of a housing code amendment. So with that, I'll just go ahead and pass it off to Matt.
Okay, and just before you start, Matt, I wanted to say we're going to kind of switch from our format last meeting. Last meeting, we were kind of interrupting as Matt was going and presenting and asking questions. But I think what we're going to do this time, for the sake of time, is save those questions for the end so that we can hopefully expedite this a little bit.
Okay. So where we have questions for you or want to get your feedback on stuff, do you want me to, it sounds like you just want me to go through the whole presentation and then you want to go back and kind of look at those things where we have questions, or do you want me to stop and ask you questions? How do you want to do that?
Well, sorry, I should have clarified a little bit better on that. We would like to get feedback from the commission and also the resource or the advisory group. But if there's any public comment or questions, then we'll save that for the end. Sorry, I didn't clarify that.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. All right, cool. So I'm gonna share my screen. There we go. All right, can everybody see that? Okay. Just give me one moment and I'm gonna make you all bigger on my other screen. All right, cool. All right. So I'll just kind of walk through this PowerPoint, kind of talk about the different possible suggestions we have, ask you some questions along the way, get your feedback, kind of similar to what we've done at the previous meetings. And then, as you noted, if there's anybody not on the Planning Commission or the Advisory Committee, they'll comment at the end. So just kind of quickly, and somebody's, is that the conference room or somewhere else with a phone ringing? And whoever that is might want to.
Yeah, it's mine. I keep hanging up and they keep calling back.
All right, sorry about that. So we'll give you a quick status report. We finished up the online open house that we had open last month. So we'll give you a quick summary of what we heard from people on that. There's a couple of tweaks that we're recommending to the batch 1 and 2 amendments that we'll mention briefly. I may need to get Brandon or Don to help me with one of them because I was looking back at it and I wasn't sure. There's not like all of the text context on the slides. So I might need some help with that one. I'll let you know when we get to it. And then we'll talk about these batch 3 amendments, which were the subject of the memo that we sent out in advance of this meeting. We have a series of code graphics. Some of them are graphics that would be actually potentially in your code to illustrate specific standards, and some are more just sort of illustrative of different options that we're looking at. So I'm going to show you those as I talk about the potential code amendments. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit. And for anybody at home that's looking at like a paper copy, I think Mary, if she's on the phone, might be doing that or looking at it on another screen. I'll try to at least tell you like which slide I'm on if I do bounce back and forth, because we didn't totally integrate the graphics with the standards we're talking about. So, but that's the point of some of those graphics. So I'm just giving you a little heads up that I'll be doing a little bouncing back and forth within the presentation, but I'll try to let people know where I am in case they're looking at it on something else. And then we'll just kind of finish up with a quick next steps. So that's the plan. So just a reminder of kind of where we are in the process. So again, tonight we're focused on kind of this third batch of potential amendments to your code. The next step after tonight is for us to come back with a combined set of revised draft code amendments that incorporate all the feedback we've gotten from you over the last 3 meetings, including this one, and then present those to you for one more look at them. And then subsequent to that, we would go through the adoption process with members of the Planning Commission here and then the City Council. Somewhere between those 2 meetings, or not actually between them, but before the next one, I'm fairly sure that the 35-day notice is going to have to go out to the state. So it's going to include our draft at that point. And that's a draft. And the state knows that stuff changes after that 35-day notice goes to them. But that's just a procedural thing that's going to happen. So that's just kind of a heads up about that. And the goal is essentially to have finished this process up by approximately end of May. A little bit of wiggle room there in terms of your statutory kind of deadline for when the city has to adopt some of this stuff. And really, that deadline and requirement is for adopting things that are specifically related to duplexes. So some of the other things that have been talking about and we'll talk about tonight are related to triplexes, quadplexes, townhomes. There's not a state requirement that you have to adopt those by June 30th. And so likely what we'll end up doing is potentially splitting those things out between a couple of different ordinances. So you've got one that's discrete in terms of the duplex amendments, and the other one's the other things that you could potentially adopt. And I think that might just give you a little more flexibility. We'll make sure Jonathan thinks that's a good strategy before we do that. But I want to make sure that like some of the things that you could do but aren't required to do don't hold up the things that you're required to do by the state. So I think that was our thinking on that. So that's, again, just kind of a recap of where we are on the process. Online open house and survey results. So the survey was open for about a month and a half, from January 18th to March 1st. We had 600 visits to the open house. So people kind of logging on and looking at the information. Sometimes that's like one person looking at it from more than one device. So not necessarily 600 people, but 600 visits. But we had 171 survey responses, which frankly, I think is great. That's more than we see a lot of times from larger communities than the Dalles. There's a few like little communities out there where they're just hyper engaged. I'm going to say like Sisters, and we got a similar number there, but they're a smaller population. But I would call that a pretty good response, or a very good response. So we asked people some questions that were kind of demographic type questions. We asked them, do they own a home? Do they rent a home? Do they live in a single family detached home, or do they live in some other kind of housing? And not surprisingly, just based on the kind of what we tend to see in these surveys, but also what the housing stock looks like in the Dalles, the majority of them, 83, 84% are homeowners and or live in single family detached homes. But I would say despite that, when we ask people about, what kind of housing would you like to see more of in the Dalles, there was really strong support for just kind of a full range of housing. This one was a little bit hard for us to summarize the results of. I'll say Brandon had to do a lot of like counting on this one because we asked it as a kind of semi-open-ended question. And so some people said, well, this kind and that kind, or just this kind. So that's sort of what you see reflected on this pie chart. So you'll see, in some cases, just one specific kind of housing like duplex, but then there were some people that said middle housing, which encompasses all the things we've been talking about, and multifamily housing, or they just said middle housing or just multifamily housing. But really a large percentage of them probably, if I look at sort of the cottage clusters all the way over to multifamily housing, or I guess I should say maybe townhomes in there too, that's like 75% said we need more of some of these other types of housing, not just single family detached homes. So that was an interesting result to me. We asked a similar question in a similar survey in West Linn, and you might not be surprised to know that the responses were really different in West Linn. So I thought, that was fascinating, and I think bears up a lot of the conversation that we've had with you all about some of the standards related to duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. So we asked people too about some specific objectives related to housing. Oh, I do want to note, as it says on here, there were some concerns over parking, and we've spent a lot of time talking about parking. We'll talk about it some more tonight because, no meeting would be complete without talking about parking standards. So we'll give it another go on a couple of things. And then we also asked people about specific objectives related to housing, and the things that ranked the highest were increasing the supply of affordable housing and increasing homeownership opportunities. So those were kind of the two highest ranked objectives. So that's a quick summary. We have a more detailed summary. Can't remember, did we send that out in the packet as well? Dawn, do you know? Or Josh or Alice?
I don't think so.
We will make sure we send that out to you. I couldn't remember if we'd send it out to you, but we'll get you the full summary so you can see that. And the full summary has all the responses to those open-ended questions. So you can like really spend a lot of time looking through that if you want, or just focus on the pie charts and the things where we ask things in a more sort of simple multiple choice manner. So anyway, any questions about the summary or what we heard before we move on? All right, I'm gonna keep going then. So a couple of, as we've been kind of working on each successive batch of these code amendments, there's a couple places where we've kind of gone back and revisited some things from the previous batch. So we had a question last time. One of the things we talked about previously was what lot sizes to recommend in the RH and RM zones for single family detached and duplex and duplexes, because we need to, that's one of the things you're required to do is allow those two types of housing on the same lot sizes, because you have to allow a duplex on every lot where you allow a single family home. So basically the lot size for those two has to be the same. And we had potentially suggested kind of essentially bumping up the lot size, minimum lot size for a single family detached home somewhat from what it is in those zones, because our feeling was it was going to be really hard to get a duplex on some of those very small lot sizes in those zones. And there was a question from Nate at, I think it was the last meeting, about, well, you know, how would that affect lots that are quite small? How many lots are there that are pretty small where you now wouldn't be able to build one of those types of housing when you could before, because you've increased the minimum lot size? So we, and when I say we, I mean Brandon, did a kind of a quick GIS analysis of that to look at how many parcels are there in those different size ranges. So in the RH zone, the recommendation was to bump the size from minimum lot size from 1,500 to 2,500 square feet for, again, either a single family detached home or a duplex. So we looked at how many parcels are there in that range. And there's about 32 of those 32 parcels. 21 of them are developed with an existing home. There's 6 vacant lots, but that belong to a public agency. So there's kind of a smattering of small vacant lots in that size range that belong to the city, county, or the Port Authority. That's a pretty small percentage of the total lots in that zone. It's actually like 1%, because they're in that zone, in the RH zone, there are a total of 2,841 lots. So that's kind of the percentage of lots that would be affected there. And the other thing I think we looked at are, you know, are any of them constrained or unbuildable? Not too many of them. There's a few, and most of the ones where we showed some kind of constraint, usually slopes, actually have a house on them. So they may have some constraints, but they actually are developed. Kind of similarly, in the RM zone, we had suggested potentially bumping that minimum lot size for those two types of housing up to 4,000 square feet. So between 2,000 and 4,000 square feet, there's 93 parcels in that range in that zone. And that does represent, now most of those have an existing home on them. There's only 3 of them in that range that are vacant, that aren't developed at all. So those would be sort of the only 3 where you would go, oh. And if it's a lot of record, you probably would allow development anyway. And I don't know what your code says about undersized lots of record in terms of ability to develop it. But most of those lots in that size range have a house on them. So that's just something to note. And there aren't as many residential lots in that zone, in the RM zone. There's 795, so it does affect a larger percentage of the lots in that zone. It affects about 12% of the lots in that zone. A certain number of those have some constraints similar to in the RH zone. And so that's what we found when we looked at that. And I think the point of looking at that when Nate suggested it was, is this going to create, is this going to reduce the supply of lots where somebody could develop either a single family detached home or a duplex? So that's kind of what we found. And I want to see if there's any comments or thoughts about, does that affect that recommendation? And I see Nate's got his hand up. So yeah, Nate, and then anybody else after that who might have some thoughts on this.
Well, and I just wanted to ask, so what we're talking about here is that lots that fall within that size. And one of the questions I had, and I think it's impossible to get to, is lots that are underdeveloped. So as I walk around the Dalles, I see a lot of double yards. Some of them are separate tax lots, some of them are not. And so if you had a yard that was, say, I don't know, I'll give an example of, 4,500 square feet, which would not be a common one, and your house was on one corner, then you couldn't parcel off, subdivide that. Then at that point, if you couldn't subdivide off 1,500 to do a smaller development on that, right? And so this doesn't take into account, and I'm probably getting way over my skis here. I'm seeing the planner's eyes get big here, but this doesn't take into account potential subdivisions, I guess, and that potential impact on supply.
We did not look at that. That's we wanted to do something we could quickly do to get back.
Yeah, understood. So I'm just, that's my only question.
Sure.
And that's my only question. So this isn't the full net impact of this policy. In other words, this is the impact on lots that already exist in this size. And I just anecdotally, my observation is there's a lot of lots that are different sizes that could have a lot more housing on them. So.
And I expect you're probably right about that, but yeah, we don't look at those numbers. It would be very interesting to look at, and a little harder, especially not knowing sort of where the house is situated on the lot, yeah.
It'd be like the development value numbers, could get you partway there maybe, but
So I guess, the question here is, does this influence anybody's opinion about the earlier conversation we had related to this potential change in minimum lot sizes, and also taking into account what Nate just said? I'm going to mute myself so you don't hear my phone in the background.
Feel free to unmute yourselves, commissioners, if you have any questions or comments towards this.
Miller has a question.
Okay, go ahead.
So if I own a 50 by 100 lot and I come into the planning department and I want to put a single family dwelling in the center of that lot, can I?
Yeah, this doesn't change anything in terms of the, it depends on the zone, but it doesn't change anything in terms of that. What this would do would say, if you have a 4,000 square foot lot, or something that's less than 4,000 square feet, and it's in the RM, the medium density zone, then you wouldn't necessarily be able to put another house on it, and you wouldn't be able to subdivide it down to 2,000 square feet and have 2 houses or 2 duplexes on that 4,000 square foot lot. Does that make sense? Did I get that right, Dawn, from your perspective? Yeah, okay. And sort of similarly in the RH zone, the high density zone, if you had a lot that right now, the minimum lot size for a single family detached home is 1,500 square feet. And so if we just kept that the same, then you could put a duplex on that same size lot. So right now, let's say you had a 3,000 square foot home or lot, excuse me, in the, to kind of get to Nate's point, in the RH zone, you wouldn't be able to split it in half and put 2 single-family detached homes or duplexes on each of those resulting lots. And I thought I might have seen Philip's mic unmuted a minute ago. Philip, did you have anything to add or say on this one? Or was I imagining things? All right, I'm gonna say Philip did not. Anybody else on this one? It's, again, does this change anybody's or, you know, guide anybody to suggest that there's a couple options here, I guess. In each of these zones, we can either go with what we had suggested before, which was bumping the minimum lot size up to 2,500 and 4,000 square feet respectively for a single family detached home and a duplex, same size for either of those, or keep it what it was or go somewhere in between. So anybody have any opinions on that?
So essentially what this is saying is in the RH zone, you have to have a minimum of 2,500 of a minimum of a 2,500 square foot lot to be able to have a home or potentially 2 homes on the property. And the same for the RM with the 4,000 square feet.
Correct. And then above that, what we've already said, and I think everybody was on board with, was any additional homes or units, housing units, would be in the RH zone at 1,500 square feet per unit, and in the RM zone, 2,000 square feet per unit. So really, we were just talking about for a single family detached home or a duplex.
So if like, let's say for instance, you're in the RM zone and you have 3,500 square feet. If you want to build a home, you can only build a home. You can't build a duplex. Is that what that is saying?
You can still build a duplex, because that's the whole sort of one of the major points of 2001 is that on every lot where, let's see, did you say the RM zone or the RH?
Right. Yep. RM.
RM. So in the RM, depending on what your code says about the ability to build on undersized lots, you wouldn't be able to go out and partition a piece of property, create a new lot at 3,500 square feet and build a single family detached home or a duplex on that. If you had an existing one, and again, I'm sorry, but I just don't know what your code says about kind of like existing undersized lots or lots of record, because often cities say, look, we can't take away all value on those lots. And so we allow you to build a single family detached home on those lots, even if they're undersized, below the minimum lot size, because otherwise we're telling you, you cannot develop the lot. And if that was the case, you'd be able to build a single family detached home or a duplex on those, but you wouldn't be able to take in this case, you know, a 10,000 square foot lot and partition off a couple of 3,500 square foot lots and build single family detached homes or duplexes on them in the RM zone. Does that, I know that's kind of complicated, but does that make sense? Alice is shaking her head or nodding her head. Yes. And I think Don's looking stuff up, but
I kind of get it. It's saying for any new lots created, they would have to meet those size standards.
yes,
Correct.
that's the way I would sort of think about it.
Any older lots that are in that zone that were created prior to all this going into effect, they would still qualify. Is that
They were undersized. I think that's probably the case, unless you have, you know, some that says otherwise.
okay?
No, so Brent, just to let you,
Sorry,
Sorry,
I was
so-
going to say it could just be late, and I'm just not wrapping my head around it for some reason. But I appreciate you explaining it further. I understand it now.
so we do in our code, we recognize legal lots of record, and we do have a section that details non-conforming lots of record. So we do allow a use that's permitted in that zone to be constructed on a lot of record that is may or is non-conforming in that zone.
So I pretty much got it right. It sounds like.
Yep. Good job, Matt.
Okay, perfect. Were there any other questions from commissioners for Matt before he moves on?
Chair, I just wanted to offer staff's recommendation is still that the RH zone be changed, the minimum lot size be changed to 2,500 square feet, and the RM zone 4,000 square feet. That is still staff's recommendation.
Okay.
So I guess I'll ask, does anybody disagree with that recommendation? Maybe that's an easy way to kind of ask the question.
And if you do, feel free to speak up.
All right. And I am not.
I do have just a clarifying question. So the main reason we would increase the minimum lot size is so that we can comply with the rule of duplexes being able to make sense on that lot. Is that correct? Yeah.
Chair,
Yes,
I'll give you,
that was our thinking. Yeah.
I'll give you our rationale for the recommendation. In October of 2019, staff recommended and Planning Commission and City Council approved lowering the minimum lot size in the RH zone to 1,500 square feet and 2,000 square feet in the RM zone. And now with the new laws that are coming in, that have come into effect, HB 2001, we are now in a position of now saying you have to fit a duplex. You have to be able to fit a duplex onto a 1,500 square foot lot. Can you do that? Yes. It's going to be a really small structure, and its parking is going to be an issue. It's going to be difficult. And I was really compelled personally by Commissioner Popoff's comment that we have a lot of 50 by 100 foot lots, and we have half, the lots that are 25 by 100. And so 25 by 100 is 2,500. So yeah, it just makes sense. It's a bigger lot size that could accommodate a duplex, we believe. And it's just more, I think it's more in keeping with the character in the Dalles.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. I guess the one thing that speaks against it is that because we are bound by the urban growth boundary, in my mind, one of the objectives has been to increase urban density so that we can allow for more growth within. And so that's why the law was put in place about the duplexes, which makes sense. And now then, if we then increase the minimum requirement of the lot, are we just kind of undoing what is intended to be done with the duplex regulation by increasing the lot size and then actually not fulfilling the ultimate objective of increasing urban density to be able to grow more on the inside?
So I'm gonna.
Well, even with the larger, even with the larger lot size, you could still, probably double or triple the population of the Dalles theoretically.
And I'll just add a couple things, and this isn't
infrastructure, which if you put too much into the existing residential areas, you're going to have to reduce a lot of your infrastructure, like sewer and water and so forth. Not to mention the streets and parking situation.
And I'm just going to add, kind of in addition to that, or on the flip side or something, that you're still, because of some of the other recommended changes that we talked about earlier, and that I think we had general support for, we're still decreasing the allowable lot sizes for some of the other forms of housing we've been talking about, so triplexes and quadplexes, to essentially 1,500 square feet per unit or 2,000 square feet per unit, respectively, in those RH and RM zones. And so that is a pretty substantial density, average net density in those zones. I mean, that gives you, in the RH zone, somewhere on the order of 25 units an acre in the RM zone, somewhere on the order of 20 units an acre. So I think you're still getting a fair bit of allowable density in those two zones generally. And we've kind of, to some degree, balanced this bumping up the lot size for just duplexes and single family detached homes with reducing it for triplexes and quadplexes. And then multifamily units is essentially the same size. So I don't know that I would say that you've really been counterproductive towards the goal. And I would also say that 1,500 square feet is quite a small lot for a, not that you can't do it, again, for a single family detached home and for a duplex. And 2,500 square feet is really still a pretty small lot for a duplex, and even for a single family detached home to some degree. So I don't think I wouldn't call it super counterproductive. And I tend to, as a planner in this who works, whose office is in the city of Portland, and who works for a lot of jurisdictions in the Portland metro area and other larger jurisdictions, I tend to advocate for bring the lot sizes down. But I think in this case, it seems like a reasonable set of recommendations to me. So I'm just going to put that out there. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what
it's super helpful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Well, and I can appreciate your comments, Philip, raising the lot size versus trying to add more density. It almost seems like we're adding weight to both sides of the scale. I can see your discussion there, Philip. Is that what you were trying to say?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But that was helpful, and it's really helpful to hear from you, Matt, also just kind of the context of what does this proposed density mean compared to other communities. So thank you so much.
And where you've ended up on triplexes and quadplexes is pretty close to what the state guidance is for the larger cities in the state. So that's the other thing I would note is you're getting pretty close to that on those types of developments. So that's good. That's a good step as far as I'm concerned personally. Yeah. So it sounds like this is that in general, people are good with the staff recommendation, and we're going to assume that and move forward with that when we put together the combined set of recommendations or proposed code amendments based on what I'm hearing tonight. Does that sound good?
Let's go around the horn real quick. I just want to make sure. Alan, do you have any concerns? Head shake, no. Linda?
My only concern is I think 2,500 and 4,000 are okay, but I'm from the country. But I'll go along with staff's recommendation.
Okay. And let's see, Mark.
Yeah, I think 2,500 is reasonable for minimum lot size.
Okay. And then Philip?
Yeah, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, and Carly?
I agree. Let's go with the staff recommendation.
Okay, perfect. And I agree as well.
All right. So then we had a couple of, I'm going to say, cleanup things. I'll mention B, and then A is the one thing I need help with from Brandon or Dawn, because I couldn't remember what part of the code this was in, and I couldn't find it in batch 2 tonight. B is just basically saying duplexes aren't counted in density calculations because that is part of what HB 2001 says, and we just hadn't gotten it in there in the first batch. So we just wanted to include that. A, I can't remember because I don't see the rest of the language. So Brandon, can you help me out with that one? Sorry about that, everybody.
Yeah, that says setbacks on alleys, rear yard setback for garage, carport, and accessory dwelling units.
No,
That's
not,
the amended
not
part.
number 3 at 2A.
Oh, 2A, sorry. Oh yeah, I just stumbled upon this provision while we were doing batch 3, and in previous update sets, we recommended removing that minimum or maximum density provision for X units per acre in those development standard tables for each of the residential zones.
Got it. Because
So-
it's not consistent with the lot size requirements.
Right. So this is just something we missed in previous batches and just recommend striking it out just to be consistent throughout the code.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't remember where that one came from. All right, so there's kind of clean up things, and then the number 3 was something we talked about actually I think at the last meeting, which had to do with rear yard setbacks for garages, carports, and accessory dwelling units, because we talked about allowing those to essentially come up to either the rear lot line adjacent to the alley or within 5 feet of it. And I've got I'll show you a code graphic on that in a little bit later, but that was just, again, kind of making sure we added that language into that based on the previous discussion. So those were batch 1 and 2 update revisions. With that, I'm gonna jump into batch 3. So a couple of things here. Oh no, still batch 1 and 2, sorry. So one of the things we talked about last time was how to define a duplex. And ultimately, I think what we heard from the majority of you was that we should allow duplexes to be defined as either attached or detached. So that's showing you kind of what that definition would look like there. Under design standards E, initially, this one, I'm going to say, we're going to have to go back and have a little more conversation with staff on this one, because this was sort of Brandon and I looking at a particular provision and thinking it needed to be fixed. And then the fix raising more questions than it answered. So I apologize, but I'm just going to say we're going to set that aside. We're going to have to come back to you next meeting with that one, because we haven't looked at it enough. So sorry about that. And then F is, we talked about this last time in terms of requiring front entrances on single family detached homes, which you require now, for a duplex, having at least one of the units having a front entry. And the second unit could have an entrance on the side. Also, if you've got 2 units and one is like behind the other one, at least half of it's obscured by the front entrance, that rear unit doesn't need to meet that front entry standard either. And that's kind of consistent with some language we developed for the model code. Did anything to add to that, Dawn? Or
that's good.
Brandon?
Perfect.
Get it right. And eventually I'll show you a graphic that just we would use to illustrate this requirement. I won't scroll forward to it now, but I'll show it to you when we get to the graphic stuff. So I guess just any questions or comments on that one, on any of those things, other than the one I said, don't talk to me about. Yeah.
I guess real quick question. I guess it's the first time I've seen it attached to family dwellings. I don't know if we're using attached to family anywhere else. Do we want to just say duplexes?
Probably.
I don't know if attached to
Probably,
family
yeah.
would create any
Yeah.
kind of confusion in the future for anybody.
It might be useful to have a list of definitions attached to the code for this
Yeah,
sort of thing.
Yeah, and so I think, yeah, good point, Josh. We'll make sure our definitions are consistent and we're using the same terms throughout the code, and we'll take a look at that and kind of make sure we do that. So
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
You're revising subsection F. and not to ask you about that one yet?
Yeah, he's just saying attached to family dwellings. I mean, that's essentially a duplex, and that is what we're talking about there. So, yeah.
And for some reason, my memory is failing. I thought that we did not land on that the commission thought it would be okay if the front of dwellings didn't face the street, and the commissioners can correct me if I'm wrong.
I think what we heard is that the dwelling ought to have a front entrance. But if you've got, think about a duplex where you've got a rear unit and a front unit, whether they're attached or detached, you can't really have two front entrances. One of them's going to have to essentially have a side entrance. And I think that's what we were talking about there.
Okay.
What about a manufactured home?
Well, if it's a single family dwelling, then it needs a front entrance facing the street as well. If it's on its own lot, it would meet the same standard. So yeah, I think it would essentially, if it's on its own lot, it's essentially still a single family detached home. It's just built as a manufactured home. It's got the same standard.
Okay. You said we're coming back to that one though. You're going to revise that.
I'm gonna, we'll revise that language about attached to family dwelling, since we hadn't, as Josh said, used that in other places. So yeah, I apologize for that.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions on these? All right, I am not seeing anybody raising their hand or doing this, so I'm gonna keep going and assume that other than the kind of the language change here, and that we come back to you on the middle item E, that we're good on the others.
Okay.
So now we're gonna actually get into kind of the new stuff, the batch 3 items. And so one of the things we talked about early on, I think it was maybe the first meeting with you all, was container homes, tiny homes a little bit too. And so we have some potential changes to the code and questions for you here. So one, if we're going to allow for these housing types, we need definitions of them in the code. So we've got some proposed definition language. And then if we're going to allow for them, they need to be added to the list of permitted uses. So that's kind of the middle part. So the question is, should we define and regulate these housing types separately from single family detached dwellings? That's one question. Because really tiny homes, I mean, if you currently don't have a minimum size limit on single family detached homes. So in some ways you don't necessarily need to define them separately or discretely, but you could, if you want to make it clear that you want to allow for those, then you could do that. But I'm not sure that it's absolutely necessary. Container homes, I think right now you actually prohibit them in certain residential zones. So you would need to update your code to allow for them. Did I get that right, Dawn? Yeah.
Correct.
So if you want to allow for them, one, you need to include a definition. You need to include them in the permitted list of uses. And so I guess the question is, do you want to do that? Is first question. The second, anybody see any building code or design issues with these, assuming they meet building code standards? I mean, and that's an assumption just sort of across the board that these forms of housing would need to meet your building code standards. You have some other design standards where you've got this menu of design standards and everything's got to have at least 6 of those things. So it may be more challenging for container homes, for instance, to have 6 of those elements, but not necessarily impossible. And so I guess that's sort of one question, is that fine? And are there any other issues or unintended consequences? So those are our questions for you on these. One, do you want to specify them? Just, be clear that, yeah, you're going to list them as allowed uses and you're going to define them. And then 2, are there any issues that we should be thinking about?
I want to jump in really quick. When we do have design features for single family homes, specifically manufactured homes, those usually, in order to meet those 6 design features, they were there. It's like an upgrade to a standard package is what we've run into over the years. So it's not difficult or it's not impossible, but it does, increase obviously the price, and the homeowners do have to do those upgrades in order to meet those design features.
Can I ask what an intermodal container is?
Like a shipping container, like a
Okay,
freight
gotcha,
container.
gotcha. Understand.
It's kind of a new, well, I guess it's not necessarily a new fad, but there's been a movement where folks will buy used shipping containers and build dwellings out of them.
HGTV.
Yeah.
That's where you're seeing it.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it was Alice maybe that sent us a link to a company in Oregon City that builds these. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, if people didn't get a chance to look at that before, I would definitely take a look at it. And then I'll also note here just quickly that the letter you all got from, I think, Charlie Foote said he supports allowing these if they can meet the same design standards that you currently require for other single family detached units. So I will just pass that along.
So to start the conversation, I'd like to hear, I'm going to test your skills, Don. What challenges would a shipping container face with the design standards?
So Josh and I we shared a couple emails back and forth, and I don't know, Josh, do you have access to that pretty quick to pop it up on the screen? We kind of took a look at it, and between the two of us, I think the ones I think they're the ones in Cascade Locks, and Josh, jump in if I'm saying something wrong. Actually, I think the lady was going to show up today. I don't see her in the list. Anyway, so we ended up, it was like 4, I think we figured about 4 or 5 features just from our quick look at it. It did look like a shipping container still. It had the corrugated sides, so it did look, like that. The eaves were a little bit longer, or over 12 inches, recessed entries. I mean, it was kind of a cool setup. It was really modern looking. So it looks a little bit more, they could put roof systems on it, but, I think it would be substantial, at least the price points that we were looking at too. It wasn't, I would say, in the affordable category, but it was more, possibly that reusing and recycling materials.
Yeah, I could comment. The company that placed the 3 units in Cascade Locks has actually reached out to us. I mentioned currently it's prohibited in our code. Then I mentioned the design standards, and looking through their models, their high-end models could meet. And then you're talking $150,000 for a unit, and that's without a lot. So I don't know if that really puts us into an affordable housing type category, but I think it's out there. I know that the basic models that are being offered, and those are the ones that are in Cascade Locks, those could not meet our design guidelines. There may be 2 or 3 that they hit out of the 6. So there are substantial upgrades from what I could see that you would have to add to meet our standards.
I guess my question is, what are those upgrades that would be required?
Different.
There'd be a lot of, excuse me, there'd be a lot of upgrades needed just to meet building codes, particularly in insulation and of course, installing windows and doors. It's really not a, economy housing solution. You'd probably end up spending as much or more as you would certainly with a modular home or a mobile home. Mobile homes in particular, you could certainly get the same square footage for a lot less.
And I see what you mean, Mark. And I think, staff, you're referring to almost like a prefab designer that creates these homes for folks, right? Correct.
Yeah, there's some really nice models out there. There's a lot of different price points that they hit on. Some of the things that the Don and I, the ones we've looked at that we didn't see could meet specifically are regarding exterior window sills. They didn't seem to be very present. Bay or bow windows, those are design standards that we didn't see. commercially available siding. Obviously, typically they're using the metal siding of the container itself. The roof pitch, mostly the roof pitches that you're looking at are less than the 412, which we require. So there's 3, but not to say they can't be met. I mean, they definitely can be met. I think it's just it's a higher price point than what we might consider an affordable option.
Well, I know I'm not going to get too far in. What I would like to do is get feedback from the commissioners now that we've kind of had it described by staff. So let's start. Do any of the commissioners have any questions or comments towards that?
Yeah, I do on the container homes. I think that potentially some of those could look pretty bad too. You know, the ones you're talking about are probably made by a company that does a very good job, but I worry about someone building one themselves. And so I guess I have some reservations about using the design features requirement. But, you know, I think it'd be okay if we did allow it, provided that the design features were met.
And I'm kind of tracking along with you, Alan. As long as we have the design standards in place, I don't think there's any reason we shouldn't allow it, but it would still need to meet those standards. You know, it couldn't be a graffitied up shipping container put all together, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Some of that graffiti looks good.
Well, I mean,
Some.
now, yeah, I guess I can't differentiate between art. But are there any other commissioners that would have any comments towards this?
I just have a quick question. So container housing currently is not allowed in our building code. Is that historically, is that intentional, or is it not in our code because this is a new style of housing that our code has yet to respond to?
So I think it's a mix of both, Carly, to be honest. And we did, you know, our code was originally, the major update was done in 1998. So, you know, for us to jump on board, it would have been a little bit, you know, we would have been ahead of the game. And I don't think that was what we were. But in terms of intermodal containers, what we've had is we prohibit them in residential areas because, and I think we all have seen them, they show up and like Commissioner Easling said, they tend to basically show up looking like they did, you know, when they purchased them. As it's really not any maintenance. There's no aesthetics to it. So we've received complaints over the years about people moving in these cargo containers. And in '98, when we did the code revisions, we just eliminated that as an option in a residential zone. A few years, it's probably about 10 years ago, we did expand and allow for with some design features allowed in the commercial light industrial. They're allowed in industrial zone, and I think they're allowed in commercial general zone, but any other zone, I don't think they're allowed.
So another area where they could come in and not have to meet the design standards might be if they show up as an accessory storage area and they're not really a residential. Those can be kind of unsightly. If you had a neighbor, you'd invested a whole bunch of dollars into your property and your neighbor plopped a few of those as a place to store their stuff. It's just a different look than maybe the character that you've created in your neighborhood. So I know in some neighborhoods, the prohibition has been welcome because people don't want those proliferating as accessory buildings. We don't, so that's the danger, I think. And the other thing I just offer as my own opinion, as far as having them as housing, I think it's really adding an edgier character to our city if we decide we want to allow those as dwelling units. And that's not a bad thing. It's just really, I think the commission ought to think about the character that they want to create with their city by allowing different types of units. And that may be part of why it's been prohibited so far. The ones I've seen that are good looking, it is definitely an edgier look, and it doesn't necessarily fit in with everything else, but that's not always a bad thing, you know. So it's just what do you want to create? This is one thing that if you decide you want us to explore this a little bit more, you can say we're interested. We can put it in a parking lot that would kind of reside outside of this grant project, and we can come back to it. So I just wanted to give you that freedom if you decide you want us to kind of look at this in more detail. It would be something we'd be happy to do.
I support what Alice said.
Yeah, and you know, it almost seems like it would need its own set of design standards. So some standards that may not prohibit it as much as our current standards do, but that would still require them to look somewhat decent, you know, not necessarily having to have bay windows or siding on them. But yeah, same as Commissioner Miller. I think, you know, I wouldn't be opposed to including it, but it may be best to table that for another time. What do the other commissioners think on that?
I guess I'm kind of leaning towards just keeping the existing prohibition, but maybe we could look at it at another time.
Okay. And Carly?
I would prefer to look at this at another time. It seems to be a fairly significant deviation from the design of the community. And I think that this would be something that we could receive a lot of input from the community from if it was a very narrowly targeted conversation. And especially if we're talking about something that potentially has a long-term effect on neighborhood perceptions of beauty. I think that that would be something that we could benefit from the community really having a targeted conversation about it.
Okay. And I'm going to go to the other commissioners. Philip?
Yeah, same here. I like the idea of figuring out a way to allow for it, but it needs to be done thoughtfully.
Okay. And do you agree with that, Alan?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Perfect. And Linda agrees with that as well, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay, that's great. So we'll kind of pull this one off the code amendment list, put it kind of in the parking lot. You know, to the extent we can give you a little more information about it as part of this process, just to consider at a future date or a future time, we'll do that. But we will not include it in the next round of combined code amendments that we bring back to you.
Okay. When we see it again, it may be helpful for some visual representations of what would be acceptable in the Dalles, and then also what wouldn't be acceptable.
Okay. And, you know, so we do have plugged into this process sort of one more community outreach, likely online survey again. I'm pretty sure I'm correct about that. And so this is a question we could put out there, not so much as should the city amend its code, but should the city think about this in the future? Do you have any thoughts about it if the city does? So we can talk about that some more with staff. But I'm just putting that out there as, you know, we might have an opportunity to get a little information about it now, even though we're not going to kind of take it through the code amendment process now. So just a thought. All right, I'm going to move on. And this is where I'm also going to start showing you some of the graphics that we got from the folks at Cascadia Partners. So we got a couple things here I want to talk about. One, whether or not to do some further changes or reductions to lot width standards. We already talked about this topic last time. As the folks at Cascadia were doing some of these graphics for us, they said, you know, there's a lot of lots, and we've talked about this before, there's a lot of lots in the Dalles that are 50 feet wide. And if you're requiring a 60-foot lot width for a triplex or a 75-foot lot width for a quadplex, there's a lot of lots you can't develop with that kind of housing without having two lots. So they said, maybe, you know, we want to think about reducing that lot width further for one or both of those housing types down to 50 feet. That's more consistent with the size of a lot of your existing lots in those zones, in the RM and RH zones. So that's one issue. Then the second thing is has to do with height. So again, in kind of doing those some massing diagrams of what these units would look like on certain size lots with your existing standards, you allow for 40-foot building height for these forms of housing in those zones. And they said, that's can be a kind of fairly massive looking building depending on how it was designed. And maybe you want to think about some tweaks to the height limit for triplexes and quadplexes, but you might want to think about for what we would call multifamily, 5 or more units, generally going to be apartments. Maybe you want to bump it up a little bit to actually make that form of housing a little more financially feasible. So I'm now going to kind of scoot forward in the presentation and show you some graphics to illustrate these two things. And then we'll talk about, what do you think? Do you like these ideas or not? So I'm just going to kind of scroll forward till I get to these. So these next couple kind of illustrate the height particularly issue, but they also to some degree illustrate the lot width. So this is what a building could look like with a 40-foot height with a flat roof. I think you guys do require a pitch on the roof, so this might not be so much of an issue, even though they showed us this. But even if you have a pitched roof, that's a 40-foot tall building, and that's still a pretty tall building, particularly even if you're meeting your lot coverage requirements for, let's say, a triplex or a quadplex. So one thing to think about is reducing that height limit to 35 feet and to require it to be 25 feet to basically the bottom of the eave. Still get essentially a 2.5 story, you could get a 2.5 story building, but not necessarily a full 3-story building. And so that's something for you to think about. Do you want to reduce that height because you are allowing these kinds of houses on narrower lots than what you've done previously, or on smaller lots than what you've done previously? Do you want to counteract some of that potential mass with lowering the heights? And then I have a couple more. No, that's not it. Those are all related to parking. So I think that was actually kind of it. So that's the question on the height. I thought maybe I had the lot width, some standards for that, but I think I don't. Nope, I don't. Sorry.
So you're saying to potentially consider reducing the maximum height for tri and quadplexes, since we're allowing them on smaller lots.
Correct. Than you have been in the past. And so reducing it by 5 feet, and also you're already, I think, requiring pitched roofs, but you could require, that the base of the eave be max 25 feet. But maybe you want to reduce the height to 35 feet. And then the sort of corollary is, do you want to potentially allow for multifamily dwellings, 5 units or more, to be a little taller, to actually go to 45 feet? And those are not, you would have to do both of those things, of course. It's sort of, do you want to do one or the other or both? So I'm just going to go back to there. Yeah. And then the second question, or I guess it's the first question on this slide, is do you want to reduce the lot width to 50 feet in the RM and the RH zones for triplexes and quadplexes? Right now, that's not what we recommended, or it's not what we discussed in the previous meetings. So I'm sorry to kind of come back and tweak something we already talked about, but I am. So, and Don, Brandon, Alice, Josh, anything to add to any of that?
So the only thing is, we do allow flat roof construction on anything. Well, actually, you could even do it on 1 and 2 family homes. It's just our design feature is roof pitch greater than 312. I think manufactured homes we require to have a minimum 312 pitch. So that would be the only exemption.
You allow flat roof. So I mean, that's another reason for potentially reducing that height. And in one of the ideas there was, if you've got a flat roof, then for a flat roof, the bottom of the parapet would be 25 feet, or the bottom of the eave would be 25 feet. And the max height would be 35. So, yeah, sorry, I misheard.
Okay. Do the commissioners have any questions about that or comments towards it?
People like that idea, not like it. Like one, don't like the other.
I think reducing the height to the eave would makes sense. If you're gonna be putting a larger house, you want to do something to at least make the the mass appear more in keeping with the existing neighborhood, especially if you're building in an already developed area.
Okay.
Does the fire department have any input on that, on the height?
I'm not sure about height. I know that we do have, I mean, it could. Obviously, the heights that we've got here are pretty low. I do believe they have ladder trucks that are large and are taller. So I mean, that might be that's a good question. I know that when we deal with multifamily,
so their biggest ladder truck is a 100-foot reach. That can either be straight up or straight out, or some combination.
So yeah, and they do have certain fire life safety requirements in terms of water, whether it be a sprinkler system and or additional. Josh, is it an FDC that we require with multifamily? Is that what we're finding out?
Apologies, what's that?
Sorry. So in terms of 4 more units, what have we been running into with from the fire department that was additionally needed that isn't typically for a single or a duplex?
Well, there's fire suppression at 4 units.
Suppression system. Okay.
And my guess is they would not mind the reduced height, and maybe they'd have an opinion on bumping it up 5 feet for multifamily. But it sounds like not really an issue necessarily with the height of the ladder, but
ladder.
Yeah, the big thing to look at is distance from the fire apparatus to the structure. The fire needs to be 150 feet. They need to be within 150 feet of all sides of the building from their fire apparatus. So I don't know if they factor height into that or anything. That'd be a question for the fire marshal.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you allow buildings in your downtown too.
We do, yes.
So, yeah, good question.
Okay, so for the sake of time, we're starting to get a little late here. I'm going to go around the horn. If you folks have any concerns or comments, please raise them. Or if you agree with these changes, please state so. We'll start. Let's go with Linda.
I go with the lower height.
Lower height if we're going to do if we're going to allow triplexes and quadplexes on skinnier lots.
Yes.
Okay. And Alan?
I agree with that.
Okay. And Carly?
I also agree.
Okay. And Mark?
Yeah, I also.
And Philip?
I agree with both.
With both? So you go either way if we reduced the minimum lot width for triplexes and quadplexes, it could either be a smaller height or remain the same.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I misunderstood. This is an either or. This is not. There is no option of going both. Making the lot width narrower and decreasing the height.
We can do both.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's kind of what we've all agreed on. That I believe, and you folks can correct me if I'm wrong, that we're in support of the minimum lot width being reduced. And the building height being reduced as well.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay.
I just heard the other commissioners speak only about the lower one.
Okay. And anyone can speak up if I was wrong or misrepresented you. Okay.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. All right. And I promised you it wouldn't be a full meeting if we didn't talk about parking. So here we are. So one question we have, and this gets a little complicated, and I apologize because we talked about parking last time for triplexes and quadplexes. In those cases, you know, with a triplex or a quadplex, it's all the units are on a single lot. What we didn't talk about was parking requirements for townhomes, which are also referred to as single family attached, but that's where each unit is on its own individual lot. Right now, I believe the code requires 2 parking spaces per townhome. And the question is, would you want to consider reducing that to 1 per unit? It doesn't make a lot of sense to require like 1.5 or something of that nature for a townhome because it's a single unit on an individual lot. So we wanted to put it out there. What do you think about this? This is kind of taken a step further in terms of parking, but we wanted to ask you about it.
May I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So this is not state required changing in parking. This is our preference in parking.
Yeah, for duplexes, you are required, and we already talked about that earlier. You are required to reduce it to 1 per unit or 2 for the whole duplex, but not for townhomes. Yeah. If you were a large city, if you were 25,000 or more, then yes, you would be required to do it, but you're not in that size range, so you do not have to. Yeah, it's totally optional for you guys.
I think we should keep it at 2 per unit. I think it would just create a horrible parking problem if you know, if we increase the density, we don't also, you know, take care of the parking problem. A row house or townhome, if that's what you want to call them, is going to be at least on a 20-foot wide lot, and you should be able to get 2 parking spaces in the back, assuming that there's an alley. I guess if there isn't an alley, you'd have to set the building further back and have that in the front.
So just for
you should.
Sorry, Mark. Just for clarification, are you saying 2 spaces per dwelling unit, or 2 spaces for both of the dwellings?
No.
No, 2 spaces per dwelling unit.
So if there was let's say there was a duplex on a property, you're saying that there should be 4 parking spaces?
That we can't do. I'm just going to stop.
Well, yeah, that we can't do, but just regular, you know, row houses on separate lots, what some people call townhomes. As I said, those lots are usually would have to be, as a practical matter, at least 20 feet wide, and more commonly they're 25 feet wide. And you should be able to get 2 parking spaces on that, you know, for each lot, for each house.
Okay.
So I don't think 2 spaces per unit would be unreasonable.
Two spaces per duplex.
Per unit.
Townhome.
Now, we're not talking about duplexes. We're talking about townhomes.
Okay.
And they can often, frankly, look the same. And the difference here is that a duplex, both units are on a single lot, and 1 lot, and the townhome units, each unit is on its own lot.
2 per unit.
Okay, so we have
I had a
Mark.
quick question. I guess for clarification too, Matt. So if an individual were to build a duplex, they only have to have 2 parking spaces. If an individual decides to do a 0 lot line development with 1 unit a unit on each lot, then we'd be talking about that development would be required to have 4 parking spaces with the recent recommendations from the commissioners. Correct?
Yes. And that's what you require now. So you continue to require that. And that's what I heard the last couple of commissioners say they support. So yes,
Okay.
correct.
Okay. I will, I'm going to wait to share my opinion. Alan, do you want to share your opinion on that?
Yeah, I'm still thinking about it a little bit, but
We can come back to you if you'd like. Philip, do you feel like sharing your opinion?
Yeah, sure. To me, it makes sense to have this treated the same way as a duplex would be treated and require 1 parking space per unit. And I realize that we're not talking about duplexes here, but I don't think it makes sense for the same living space to have a different rule only because it happens to be on a separate lot.
Well, I think the state requirement is really poor planning, but there's nothing we can do about it. But we don't have to, repeat it, for other types of housing.
So maybe we can hear from the remaining commissioners. Yeah.
Yeah. And let's, Carly, do you have any input?
I guess I'm kind of stuck with this, and I know duplex has been decided, but if we leave townhomes requiring more parking, what incentive to, whereas duplex doesn't? It seems to be, whether we agree with the duplex parking requirements or not, it seems to be out of step to have 2 very similar dwellings, whatever terminology I'm supposed to be using here, with 2 very different parking requirements. And it just seems to be out of step to have 2 different requirements. So although I don't, we don't love the idea of less parking, the idea of them being different, I think is problematic.
Okay. And I think this is something that we're going to be fairly split on, and this is definitely going to be a hot topic for city council once it does go to them as well. I feel like the conversation about this probably won't end here, but I would be in support of finding a middle ground, and again matching other development to have it as 1 space per dwelling unit. I think eating up land with parking, although, I understand some families have more cars than others. Some families only have 2 cars, where you're parking a car in a parking off-street parking space, and then parking 1 on the street. I believe there's a middle ground there that we can find to allow more land area for development. So, and that's my opinion. And Matt, I think we're fairly split on it. Go ahead, Don.
So Brett, I can't see if Mary, I know Nate's here, but do we want to get, I guess they could speak up, but maybe it'd be kind of nice to pick their brains if we've got anybody out there other than Nate, including Nate.
They're part of the resource group, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
And then I think Alan,
we get that input. Yeah. Nate, do you want to chime in?
It's gonna curse me now. Sorry.
No, I mean, I think there's, my limited understanding. I've actually got a book here that the whole planning commission can read called The Affordable City, that talks about parking and its impact on the number of houses you can build. And so the more parking you have, the less housing. I do think that there's some good analysis has been had about how the public will receive this. So we'll just leave it there. Brent, I think your analysis is correct. The parking will be a big issue.
Yeah. It'll be interesting.
Hey, Alan, did you have more to say about this one?
Well, I honestly, I'm really torn. I agree with what Mark said, about, I don't really like the state mandate, but it is what it is. And I don't want to make it hard on the planning department to have to differentiate one thing versus the other based on a little technicality. And I also think that with townhomes, with row housing, you're taking up a lot of the street right there with all the driveway approaches you have. So there goes your street parking. So maybe you do need to have some more off-street parking.
Right. And I see your hand up, Nate.
I just have one more comment in all of this, and I'm just, Alan, it was actually inspired. I know you're maybe building some stuff. Like in all of these conversations, it's a question about requirements and not what the market will bear, right? And this is allowing the market to adjust over time. And so if Alan's building a duplex, he can do one or he can do two, right? Like based on this, if he's building a duplex, he can do one per unit or two per unit, depending on what he reads as the market. And so if he reads the Dallas market as liking a bunch of pickup trucks now and maybe heading towards Priuses and e-bikes in 5 years, you can adjust over time. But like in all of this, like in every single probably co-decision we discussed tonight, it's like, this is the minimum.
I think that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that till you said it, Nate. Is that, you have the option, landowners have the option to do what they would like to do with parking. If we lower the minimum, it just allows them to be able to build a bigger building, build more housing. But if they choose to add more off-street parking, they have that option. There's nothing limiting them from doing that. So that's a good point, Nate.
All right. Well, it does sound like still some diversity of opinion on this one, and we'll likely end up having more conversation about this. We might have some more conversation about this when we get to the adoption hearing with you, and then potentially with the city council if there's not a whether there is a recommendation or not, there'll probably be some conversations. All right, but I would say good enough for us on this one. Let me just see what I have next on the slide. I'm gonna actually skip. No, I'm gonna go back. Sorry. Actually, apologies. I'm just gonna scroll through to see how many more slides I have with like substantive text on them, because there's more graphics in here, and I just want to make sure I don't miss anything or tell you this is the last thing to talk about and then have it not be. Okay, so there is sort of one more thing that's like revisiting what we talked about last time related to parking options for triplexes and quadplexes. So we kind of were a little split on that, although I would say probably more people were on board with, at least, I think almost everybody was on board with reducing the parking requirements that you have now. It was just a matter of how much. So one of the things we had the folks at Cascadia do was just show us some different graphics that depict the different options that we were looking at. So I'm just going to show you those graphics. I'm going to see if you have anything, just so we don't, I wouldn't want to leave parking too early on this. Sorry to do that to you. But I'll show you these three graphics. We'll just see if you have any further comments on this. And if you don't, we'll come back with a recommendation based on what we heard last time, which again, was probably going to be somewhere in the middle of the road in terms of these three options. So one of the options was just for triplexes and quadplexes, require one space per unit. So this just kind of shows you what that would look like. All of these graphics show you what it would look like in an alley served lot. If you didn't have an alley served lot, and somebody wanted to have parking in the rear for a triplex or quadplex, then they would need to put, a driveway along the side. There'd be essentially less room for the home in any of these scenarios that I'm going to show you. So I'm just going to kind of say that up front. So this is the scenario where you got one per one per unit, and this is showing a quadplex. This is showing it on a 60-foot lot. So if we're reducing it to 50 feet, just imagine that that width gets a little smaller and it gets a little harder to have more parking spaces on the lot. So that's option one, 4 total spaces, 1 space per lot. And we showed you kind of 3 standard and 1 compact space. And you get to see kind of how much area is left that doesn't have parking or a building on it. Option 2 was 2 spaces for the first unit, 1 space for each additional unit. So with a quadplex, that would be 5 spaces. So that shows you kind of what you end up with there. You can still fit it on a 60-foot wide lot. And I think you'd still be able to fit it on a 50-foot wide lot as well for a quadplex, that many spaces, 5 spaces if 1 was compact, 1 was standard, or 4 were standard. And then the last option we had was 1.5 spaces per unit. And so for a quadplex, that essentially rounds to 6 spaces. And so you can squeeze it in there, takes up kind of, again, if this is an alley serve lot and you've got the spaces on the back there, takes up the entire width. If it was a 50-foot lot, you wouldn't be able to do that, and you'd have to find another part of the lot to put your 6 space. So we just wanted to show you these graphics and just see if that, made anybody think differently about the discussion we had last time related to those options for triplexes and quadplexes for parking. After this, I've only got one more sort of substantive slide for you. So just there's light at the end of the Planning Commission meeting tunnel here.
Okay. Dawn, can you clarify real quick? Are there setback standards for parking from property lines? Do there need to be plantings between the property line and parking, or?
So we have, if it's adjacent to a street, so I mean, kind of run into is an alley a street. We do have screening requirements between properties for multifamily as well as to the right of way. So we do have that. And Josh, jump in if I missed something. And I think we do also have a provision for, and maybe that's just single family, about parking in a setback. I'll have to take a look at that, Brent. Sorry.
That's okay.
Find out.
Kind of the way I'm tracking is on that last recommendation. If there is a required setback or required plantings between the properties, it's almost going to force the parking spaces to shift so that they're further onto the lot, reducing that open space as well. If they want to go with more parking spaces for a quadplex, let's say. But it sounds like you're about to speak up, Mark. Go ahead.
Yes. From what I remember, when I built my garage, this would be about 20 years ago, I think the setback from the driveway to the property line was something like a couple of feet, maybe 3 feet. It wasn't very much. I don't think it would have that big effect on available parking.
Okay. Were there any other comments or concerns from the commissioners? Let's go around. Carly?
No, the visual is helpful. Are you looking, is the staff going to make a recommendation, or are you asking for us to make a recommendation? I guess is where.
So I guess, yeah, fair question. And I'm sorry I wasn't super clear about that. The last time we talked about this, we didn't have kind of a clear recommendation from you as a group. I would say you all thought some reduction from the existing standard, and these all represent reductions from the existing standard, was in order. And it was a sort of a question of how much of a reduction. And I think on average, you all probably, on average, maybe you came down somewhere in the middle, like option 2, which was kind of 4 spaces for a triplex, 5 spaces for a quadplex. And we wanted to show you these graphics and just see if that changed anybody's opinion one way or the other. So I guess, yeah, I'm looking for any difference in feedback you might have tonight, if you can remember what you told me last time.
I think I landed on option two, and I would say within either recommendation 1 or 2. I think option 3 with the visual, it definitely makes it more challenging and could definitely limit folks' ability to develop a fourplex. The parking could be the limitation of them developing a fourplex if we require that parking on a lot of that size. So
Add that if the lot's 50 feet, it's even more of a problem.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I would say 1 or 2. That's where I would land.
Okay, thank you.
Because let's go around to the other commissioners before I speak up again. Let's go, Philip.
Matt, could you show recommendation 1 once more, please?
There you go.
Yeah. So I'm going to say the same again. For consistency, I think 1 parking spot per unit is what makes best sense throughout, whether it's a quadplex, a townhomes, or duplex.
All right.
So I do have a little bit of information regarding maneuvering within the right of way. So when we get to quadplexes, it's required to go through a site plan review. And obviously, if we even go with the minimum, we're looking at 4 spaces. So any parking lot over 4 spaces, it will have to have forward in, forward out movement, even onto an alley. And it does need to meet minimum setbacks widths as well as setbacks from the side property line. So some of these graphics really wouldn't work with our current standards.
Yeah.
Don, I'm thinking.
Sorry.
I'm thinking 3 units or more would have site.
Is it 3? Okay.
Unless we're changing that with these amendments.
So yeah, we would that would be.
So it sounds like at least option 3 would probably not be workable with the lot sizes we've been talking about.
I don't think.
At least to fit them the way we've shown them, at least to sort of have, you'd have to put some of the spaces in the front setback area as well, or do some other thing. You know, you'd have to take up more of the lot, is what I'm hearing.
Correct, yes.
By front in, front out, you're meaning it has to enter the property forward.
Turn
and
around, right?
To
forward in, forward out.
Forward. Oh, so
correct.
Those parking spaces would most likely have to flip to the side property line with the nose facing towards the side property line so that they could go in straight, back out, and then leave the property straight.
Correct.
Okay.
So yeah, forward in, forward out. So no backing onto the right of way. That includes the alleyway there.
Okay.
That would apply to alleys as well as the main street.
Yeah, so I was a little surprised too, Mark. I thought, so we do, the only exempted are 1 and 2 family homes. So.
And that's for new development, not, I mean, that can't be put upon existing development.
Unless you're coming in to add an additional unit, then at that time we would probably address the parking and ensure that it met the current standard. Sorry.
So Chair, and Dawn, I'm just thinking that in the interest of time, but also that we've added a layer of complexity to this issue, and that's a good thing. That gives us an out to say, hey, let's bring this one back. Let's do a little more work and formulate a staff recommendation around it. Because I think that it just got a little more complicated. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alice.
Yeah, but I would note at least the folks I heard from so far are interested in just generally requiring fewer spaces per unit. Not necessarily.
Not for Miller.
Yeah.
Okay, not for Miller. Probably not for Mark, just based on earlier comments, and maybe a couple undecideds. So.
Because I think the concern with that too is if you have to go forward in, forward out, then you have to have a driving area on that property as well, and it just eliminates even more open space. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll wait to get final comments on this until we can take all of the outliers into consideration.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So I've got just one more thing to ask about, pretty sure, before I hit just kind of next steps. So the last thing to ask about are landscaping requirements. And I might have to ask Dawn for a little more help here on this one as well, because I looked through your landscaping requirements for Article 6.010, And it wasn't totally clear to me if you're requiring a certain percentage landscaping or 1, 2, and 3 units, single family detached duplex or triplex. What we were suggesting was right now, a quadplex would fall into the same category as 5 or more units, or what we would think of as multifamily. And for those developments, you require a fair bit of landscaping. You require in the RH zone 1.5 times the first floor area of all structures at a minimum. In the RM zone, it's equal to the first floor of all structures as a minimum, and in the NC first floor also. And there is language that says that if you're if that reduces your ability to meet the maximum lot coverage, then you don't have to require quite as much, or you don't have to have quite as much. But I think our point is that quadplexes are more like these other forms than they are apartments, and you ought to apply a similar standard to quadplexes that you apply to single family detached duplexes and triplexes. So that was kind of our thinking here. And so it's just adding quadplexes in with the first set instead of with multifamily, and applying whatever standards you're applying for landscaping for those to quadplexes as well. That's the suggestion. And my only question is just, is there a percentage, or what are you applying to those? And not sure.
Pretty minor. It's really minor. So the way our code reads is single family dwellings, including manufactured homes, shall be landscaped the undeveloped portions of their front yard.
Okay.
Within 6 months. That's pretty much all it says. And
Okay.
so then we have the remaining.
So we're asking, should you apply that same thing to quadplexes or keep applying something different? That's the question here.
Okay. We'll go around to the commissioners. Does anyone want to share comments or opinions before I go around the horn? Okay. We'll start with let's start with Carly. You're at the top of the list.
Can you circle back to me, please?
Okay, I can. Yep. Philip.
Oh boy. I'm really not. I don't lean strongly either way.
Okay. Let's go with Mark.
Actually, I'd like to see more landscaping requirements. Perhaps a requirement that there be at least one shade tree in the front of the property.
Okay.
Is that an option? I like what Mark just said, but I don't think we're right now talking about what the landscaping requirement is going to be in substance, just what it's going to be applied to. Is that correct?
That's correct in terms of the question we were asking. I mean, our question was, should you apply a similar approach to quadplexes that you apply to single family attached duplexes and triplexes, whatever that approach may be? I mean, you as a city can always decide to change any of these requirements, right? But so, I mean,
okay.
That's respect the comment, but it wasn't the question we were asking. I mean, that's correct. So
okay, that just helped a lot, Matt. So then I'm just going to default on my consistency rant here and say that I'm for applying the same landscaping requirements, no matter what size unit it is.
Okay, I can agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that as well. Okay. Let's go back to Mark now that that's been rephrased.
Yeah, I would agree with that also.
Okay. And Linda?
I agree with everything except the 6 months. It depends on when you move into that place, if the weather is going to be conducive to to be putting in a landscape.
Okay, and that's probably something staff can flag and bring up at a later date for us to address. Okay, and Alan.
Yeah, I agree with consistency.
Okay, and we'll go back to Carly.
Same.
All right, I think it's unanimous, Matt.
Awesome, thank you. All right, that was my last question for y'all related to these code amendments. So I'm just gonna flip down and do a quick next steps, which is pretty much to remind you of the stuff I talked about at the, I am gonna, before I do that, just quickly show you a couple of graphics. So that we're not necessarily looking for comments on these, but these just kind of illustrate a couple of the standards we talked about previously. So the setback for garages or ADUs from the alley. And so these are just things we can have added to your code just to help illustrate the standards. And then the other one is the entries where if you get 2 units, you can have, one of them can have a side entry and one, but you need at least one facing the street on a duplex. So we just wanted to show you those. And then just kind of next steps. So our next step is we've already made some revisions that we talked about tonight to the batch 1 and batch 2 graphics or code amendments, excuse me. And we'll make some similar revisions to the batch 3 based on what we talked about tonight. And we'll also update the graphics as needed to reflect any of the changes that we talked about tonight or at previous meetings. And then we will bring that all back to you at our next meeting. And we had a conflict with the regular meeting date for that meeting. And so that's getting shifted from, it would have otherwise been, I think, on the 15th, but it'll be on the 22nd. So we'll be back to you and we'll just kind of roll through. Here's what we've talked about before. Here's where we made some changes based on what we heard from you or where there was some kind of split decision. Here's at least the staff recommendation. You can tell us what you think on those things. And then code adoption process in May. But in the meantime, we do have this opportunity to do some kind of additional online survey, I believe. And so we just need to kind of check in with staff and talk about the appropriate time for that. Pretty sure that's in our scope. Either way, I think we can do it. So we'll talk some more about that. We might shoot you an email about that and just see if you have any individual comments on it in terms of particularly the timing, whether it's better to do it. It might be tough to get it out there now, but I think we could still get it out there between your next meeting and the adoption hearings if we think that's the right thing to do. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the next meeting, but that's a potential next step as well. So.
All right.
Yeah, so that's it for me. So thank you. Thanks for hanging in.
Yeah, no, thank you for all your work. Thank you to all the commissioners for providing valuable input. I know there are a couple items that we're pushing off a little bit, but yeah, we definitely made some progress tonight. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, the next item is to move for adjournment. So I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
Chair Bybee, I know that the applicant, or not, excuse me, not the applicant, Charlie Foote is here. I don't know if he wants to say anything about the letter that he sent, and Matt kind of touched on it, but.
Yep, because I also said we were going to allow for public comment at the end. I appreciate that. So I am going to unadjourn the meeting. And if anyone from the public wishes to provide comment on anything, feel free to unmute yourself and speak up now.
I think he checked out for the night.
Oh, did he? Uh-oh.
Yeah, I think we might have worn him down because I don't see his name on the screen anymore.
I didn't.
But he did send us a letter, and I think you're all going to get a copy of the letter. And the things he said in the letter, I mean, Don paraphrased them earlier. He made several comments that were really related to systems development charges, so not really things that we've been talking about with you all. He had some other comments that were related to some other strategies to promote or support or encourage development of lower cost or affordable housing, similarly not directly related to the code. He did have a comment about supporting allowing for container homes if they're meeting your design standards. So he had that comment, and he also had a comment or two related to accessory dwelling units. And there was like one other one that I think was kind of more directly related to the code. I think it was related to parking and allowing for less parking for some of these forms of housing, I think.
Correct, yes.
Okay. So those were some of his comments. I'll pass them along, but you'll see them in the letter too.
Great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, if that is it, I am going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for hanging in there. Good work tonight, and I appreciate everyone that joined in tonight.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Take care.
Okay, good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks. Bye.
Hey, Paula.
Yes,
Do you need me to sign anything?
yes, I will be sending you the minutes.
Okay. Are those coming tomorrow?
Yes,
Okay.
or tonight.
Oh, tonight? Okay. I'll keep an
Well,
eye out for them, and
If
I'll
you'd
sign
like
it.
them tonight, your choice. What's
Well,
your
if you're gonna be up late, I'll stay up late. I don't care. I don't work tomorrow. I work 4/10, so
Oh.
I'll stay up and I'll take care of that tonight for you.
Okay, I'll forward them.
Okay, perfect. All right.
I'll
Good night,
send-
everyone.